Once again, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We will be proceeding with the panel 3 of this afternoon's activity for the Manila Dialogue in the South China Sea. For the panel 3, it'll be the rule of law in the South China Sea, should the world care. And please allow me to introduce our panel chair for this afternoon, Senior Advisor of the Pacific Forum, Sir Brad Glozerman. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Hello. We're running over. We're running late. We're not running over. But so everyone could please take their seats. We'd like to get started. While you're taking your seats, I'd like to thank the organizers, blah, 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 and move on to our outstanding panel of speakers. We're discussing in panel 3 the rule of law in the South China Sea, should the world care? I think the answer is very obviously yes. The attendance here suggests that that is in fact true, that they do care, and therefore there really isn't much need for more discussion. So thank you very much, and I will meet you all at the bar. Failing that, we will begin. I'm going to spare the introductions of our speakers because A, time is short, and B, it's very apparent from the program. So we'll just go in order, and we'll begin with Professor James Kraska. James?
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chair. Thank you to Pacific Forum and all the co-sponsors and supporters for the dialogue. My views are my personal views. They don't necessarily reflect the position of the U.S. War College, the United States, Department of Defense, or anyone else. What I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes is reciprocity and the law of the sea. And my view is that this is why the world should care about what goes on in the South China Sea, is because reciprocity is a cornerstone of international law. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea provides the global regime for governing activities on, over, and under the oceans, from the South China Sea to the Mediterranean Sea and Indian Ocean. Like all international law, the law of the sea is grounded in the concept or principle of reciprocity among states. UNCLOS sets out a balance of rights and duties distributed among coastal states, flag states, and port states throughout the world's oceans. This balance of interests is a form of reciprocity, where states acknowledge each other's rights and interests in exchange for recognition of their own. If one state erodes the rights and duties embodied in UNCLOS, states in the region and beyond may take reciprocal action, setting off a fragmentation in the legal regime at sea. Reciprocity plays a fundamental role in international law by promoting cooperation, stability, and fairness among states. It underpins the idea that states engage in legal commitments with the expectation that others will respond in kind, encouraging compliance and mutual respect for agreements. The acceptance of UNCLOS by each state in the region is based on reciprocity of implementation and compliance of every other state. UNCLOS has captured reciprocal rights and obligations in numerous regimes that are reflected in the treaty. I'll mention just 4. For example, with navigational rights, coastal states are recognized to exercise sovereignty over a territorial sea, with a reciprocal right of innocent passage for all foreign ships. Likewise, in the exclusive economic zone, coastal states are granted exclusive rights to explore, exploit, conserve, and manage living and non-living resources within the EEZ, while there's a reciprocal obligation to respect high seas freedoms, including freedom of navigation and overflight, and other internationally lawful uses of the sea in the EEZ. 2 other reciprocal rights are also among the about 100 rights that are in UNCLOS. One is amendment by agreement, the 3rd one. That is, UNCLOS can be amended, but only through agreement of states party to it. It cannot be amended unilaterally. This embodies the principle of reciprocity, as amendments require the consent of all states party to the agreement. And my 4th example is conflict resolution, the principle of lex posterior, where the later the later rule in time prevails. This also embodies a form of reciprocity, as it acknowledges that states modify their commitments over time. For example, the South China Sea arbitration found that rights in UNCLOS concerning the exclusive economic zone have displaced any earlier source of historic rights because the later in time prevails. Norms of customary international law of the sea also reflect reciprocal practice. That is, reciprocity is in UNCLOS itself, and reciprocity is also reflected in customary international law, which is a form of law that's just as valid and legally binding as treaty law. This principle is a key element of the U.S. statement by President Ronald Reagan on UNCLOS that was made on March 10th of 1983 and still reflects U.S. policy today. Reagan said, first, the United States is prepared to accept. This understanding is widely appreciated throughout the world, but it was coupled with a second part on reciprocity that is frequently overlooked and that may gain new traction in the next administration. The presidential statement continues, in this respect, the United States will recognize the rights of other states in the waters off their coasts as reflected in UNCLOS, so long as the rights and freedoms of the United States and others under international law are recognized by such coastal states. This is an explicit presidential statement that the United States views the rules in a reciprocal fashion. If the United States revisits the Reagan policy, we might wonder whether it could apply the same restrictions to China as Beijing now does to warships and military aircraft of the United States. China routinely conducts naval intelligence collection and military exercises in the U.S. EEZ off the coast of Guam, Hawaii, Alaska, and the EEZs of every state in East Asia. The United States may begin to adopt reciprocal navigational regimes, such as not recognizing innocent passage of Chinese warships in the U.S. territorial sea in the Aleutian Islands or high seas freedoms in the U.S. EEZ. Other states might follow this example. Regardless of the status of Taiwan, if Japan and the Philippines began to restrict foreign naval operations in their EEZ, as China purports to do in its EEZ, the PLA Navy would be closed off from the high seas. It would be zone locked. The United States is moving in this direction of unilateral action, as we know, in trade disputes and other aspects of international relationships, to rectify what it believes has been disparate treatment or lack of reciprocity. For example, the United States has moved sharply to implement tariffs on steel and protect U.S. semiconductor industry through the CHIPS Act. And this movement, of course, is bipartisan and will only accelerate. Finally, I'll end with one regional state that may already be incorporating this thinking. Beijing has constructed massive artificial islands with cutter suction dredging and then converted them into military outposts with runways and missile defense. Now Vietnam has embarked on building up its own artificial islands in the South China Sea in reciprocal fashion. Vietnam is building artificial islands on dozens of atolls in the region, including Nam Yet Island. In the past 3 years, Vietnam has increased its artificial land in the region tenfold. Vietnam added more than 600 acres of dry land to its holdings in the Spratly Islands over the past year alone, using a combination of shore-based dredging equipment and cutter suction dredgers. The largest amount of activity was on Bark Canada Island. It is now nearly 3 miles long and has enough space to develop a strategic airstrip of military value, 3,000 plus meters. These examples underscore the principle of reciprocity at work. If states do not comply with their obligations under UNCLOS, we may expect other states to take reciprocal action, which will undermine the stability of the rule of law in the South China Sea and indeed diminish the regime of the law of the sea worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you, James. We now turn to Dr. Chae Won-gi from the Diplomatic Academy or the Korean National Diplomatic Academy.
Thank you, Brett. I'll make very short remarks about South Korea's perceptions and positions on South China Sea. Because Korea's position has not been so terribly clear in the past, I will try to clarify by sharing my personal observations. First, South Korea has a vital interest in the stability of South China Sea maritime transportation routes. Apart from Korea's principled position on the rule of law and respect for UNCLOS, Korea is de facto an island state in terms of its geopolitical and geoeconomic location. So we are completely cut off from the Eurasian continent because of North Korea. For this reason, our economic fortune is completely tied to and dependent on the stability of the maritime transportation routes, including the ones in the South China Sea. So it is natural and inevitable for us to have a keen interest in the situations of the South China Sea and speak out if necessary. And we find it very necessary to speak out on the South China Sea, given what's going on right now, and take actions based on our national interest and principles of international rules and norms. Second, I believe South Korean perception and position on South China Sea are primarily shaped by two factors. The first one is a deep sense of crisis about the erosion of rules-based maritime order in the South China Sea. The second one is a sense of responsibility in South Korea's strategic thinking that we need to step up and join forces with other law-respecting and law-abiding countries in making sure that South China Sea remains as a stable and peaceful region that is open and common to all. Of course, our first order security priority is North Korea. However, North Korea's security threat is not the only issue that makes us feel uncomfortable, concerned, and even threatened. So the current situation in the South China Sea is such a case that makes us feel uncomfortable and very concerned. Finally, we are also very concerned about the aggressive behaviors against the countries in the South China Sea, like the Philippines, who claim lawful rights about their EEG and maritime jurisdictions based on the UNCLOS. In this respect, the ongoing disputes and disruptions in the South China Sea are a source of grave concern for us. To my knowledge, China argues that the situation in the South China Sea is stabilizing, even if its aggressive and coercive behaviors, such as deliberate, intentional, and calculated ramming, as well as water cannon attacks on the Philippines Coast Guard and civilian vessels, are happening almost on a daily basis. I think South Korea opposes these violent behaviors and coercive actions, not to mention the excessive claims that have no legal basis, as well as its militarization of key features in the spread list. So I think we have every reason to care about the past and current worrisome developments in the South China Sea. So I close my remarks by reiterating that South Korea has a firm commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific based on the rule of law and peaceful resolution of disputes, including the ones in the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea. I stop here and thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Cha. Now to Dr. Sarah Kirschberger, the head of the Institute for Security Policy at Kiel University.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think as the only European speaker on this panel, I will focus a bit on the European different naval deployments that we've been seeing this year in the South China Sea and explain the rationale behind to answer the question whether Europe cares about the situation in the South China Sea. And I think a lot of the perception in Europe actually aligns with what the colleague from South Korea just described. It's a deeply unsettling erosion of order that Europeans are increasingly worried about. So this year, we've actually been seeing substantial difference to previous years of European activity in the South China Sea. So traditionally, what you see in the South China Sea is France and UK deployments normally, and very occasionally individual ships from Europe coming through, but nothing very regular. So this year alone, we had 4 different Indo-Pacific deployments from European countries, the Netherlands, Turkey, Germany, and Italy. And 3 of these 4 NATO countries actually chose to go also through the Taiwan Strait. And they did not usually do this before, or never done this before in some cases. So without going into any of the specifics, because these are very different deployments, they were not coordinated as far as I can say. They were also conducted in very different manners with very different types of naval vessels. So the Italians sent a carrier strike group and the Turks a corvette, very different naval vessels. But nonetheless, in some, that is just a number and a presence, a type of presence that we've not been seeing. And it's not going to be the end of the story, because Norway and Greece have already said that they will deploy units to the Indo-Pacific soon. Norway will in fact join our British carrier strike group next year. And Denmark is also considering the possibility that it may have to do this at some point in the future. So given the very limited naval resources that European nations have at their disposal at the current time, as a result of reductions of fleets after the end of the Cold War, the question is, why are they doing this? What are they hoping to accomplish? Are they really trying to stir the pot to gang up on China at the instigation of the United States, as some powers allege? I think that's not a fair description of what drives these deployments. I think there are quite a few drivers behind the hard decisions for the small European countries. And I think the chief worry is really the worry over the deteriorating security environment globally. In particular, the danger of war in Taiwan, but also the hotspots in the South China Sea. And it's also the case that the EU as an organization has become so worried that it has put pressure on its member states to think about ways of contributing to a collective effort at preserving the status quo. There's also, I think, an effect from the transparency initiative, particularly of the Philippines, but also of other countries, being more vocal about the types of difficulties that they encounter at sea. Because previously, when these incidents were not made public, in Europe the perception often was there's no there, there's nothing going on there. it was very hard actually to make the case as a scholar, yes, there are problems because people didn't see it in the news. So now that they see it, it's much easier to act on it. So I can only encourage all the claimant nations to be more transparent. And I find the idea excellent that was previously mentioned about maybe a database of some sort that collects all the incidents as a basis for scholarly research. Another major driver of the European efforts is China's cooperation with Russia in joint naval activity, but also China's enabling role in the Ukraine war. We've been seeing China exercising with the Russian Navy in European waters for about a decade now. And this has never been hindered or censored by the European nations, but obviously it combines with the Chinese wolf warrior diplomacy and coercive trade practices, and very recently also with gray zone behavior that we've been seeing, in particular an incident in the Baltic Sea, the Baltic Connector case, where a Hong Kong flagged vessel traveling in tandem with a Russian vessel destroyed a gas pipeline and several data cables by dragging its anchor over the seabed. So that was one incident where we've been seeing the same type of gray zone activity that we've been seeing in East Asia. So I would say after all of this, it's not to be wondered at that the Europeans are now making these hard choices of devoting some of their naval resources to a joint effort at preserving stability. That is the aim here. And I think it's only the logical consequence of this decision of China to cooperate so closely with Russia. And it's just to be expected that this will increase. And it's also potentially the case that these experiences that the European navies are gathering through interactions with the local counterparts and through personally experiencing the harassment, that this will ultimately lead also to actually a capability enhancement on the part of the Europeans. They will probably make different procurement decisions in the future, and they may actually learn from this. So this is one possible effect. Yeah, I close with these remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kirschberger. We have a fourth panelist who is joining us online from Beijing, I believe. Or no, Wuhan, I suppose, from Professor Lei Xiaolu. Should be somewhere. From the Institute of Boundary and Ocean Studies at Wuhan University. Professor, there you are, over in the corner. Great to have you, I suppose. Please, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I'd like to express my, so can you hear me right now?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Okay, and the screen? Okay. So first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers to have me here. Thank you very much. And I think this panel is going to discuss the outside powers' role in the South China Sea. After hearing the previous three speakers, I summarized that all the concerns goes to two main issues. The first of all is about concerns of freedom of navigation. The second is about the territorial and maritime dispute between China and the parties in the South China Sea, and may cause or trigger more conflicts at the sea. So I think I will address the two issues separately here. And first of all, let's go to the freedom of navigation. I think the freedom of navigation divides into two parts in the South China Sea. So the first one goes to the civilian uses of the ocean. The second is a military use or military passage of the South China Sea. Just as Sarah mentioned, lots of the military vessels, navies from Europe, from the US transit the South China Sea as well as Taiwan Strait recent years. But to me, as far as I'm concerned, all the statistics I've got, both of the civilian vessels and the warship are never be impeded. The passage is, most of them are respected in the South China Sea. So we will have some statistics here. From the statistic provided by Alien Ship Sea in 2023, there were approximately 1.67 million sailings of various types of ships in the South China Sea, including merchant ships, fishing vessels, and other ships. And there is a report from the SSPI has made some statistics also in that report to calculating the ships and the sailings in the South China Sea. And very interestingly, when they make some statistics on the or collecting the data on the countries where the ships are from, or the flag states or regions of those ships, they have the top 10 countries or regions listed here. And for the where the ships comes from, the top 10 will be China, Hong Kong, China, Singapore, Korea, Japan, Greece, UK, Norway, Bermuda, and Germany. And for the for those flag states, it will be China, Panama, Liberia, Marshall, Hong Kong, China, Singapore, Malta, Greece, Japan, and Bahamas. You'll see that on the tables, China is always on the top. So I think maybe China has a very strong interest of the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. So this is the first very interesting here. And for the military vessels, and the CSPI also made some statistics here, and it says that in 2033, the warships from all over the world also enjoys navigational rights here. And countries in and outside the region have surface forces present over 20,000 ship days, not only the military activities of coastal states, but also from the extra powers, such as the U.S. military. And every year, the U.S. Navy maintains approximately 1,600 ship days for surface vessel present, an undisclosed number of submarines in the South China Sea. So freedom of navigation, why we're talking about the freedom of navigation is also raised as a problem. I think because most of the use of the military vessels or the civilian vessels are not publicly reported to the but sometimes we have some incidents or get some response from China, it will be publicly reported to everyone. China do response to the to those navigations, but to summarize, it just have 4 scenarios that China will make a response to those activities. First of all, it will have some actions to the warships enter into the territorial waters of its mainland and Hainan Islands. This is the first scenario. The second category will be to the U.S. if the U.S. warships transit through the waters in parasols or the territorial waters in the parasols, and China will make some response. And thirdly, when foreign military vessels or paramilitary vessels enter into 12 nautical miles of Chinese controlled features in the South China Sea, maybe you will have some response. And fourthly, when the foreign military or paramilitary vessels excessively approach or intrude the PLA military exercise, maybe China will have some degree of responses. But despite of these limited situations, all those kind of passages are respected in the South China Sea. And you may think that in many of the issues, the U.S. Navy has trespassed in the EEZ. Why China believes that it's a provocative activities? I think that depends on situations. For one thing, sometimes the U.S. Navy goes in very, very close to the outer edge of the territorial sea. Yes, from international law, it is within the EEZ, But if we put this action or activity into a context of a specific time, very sensitive time, or very sensitive situation, for example, between in the Taiwan Strait when the two sides have some intentions, or considering the locations, because China argues that it have territorial sea and EEZ from both sides to the middle of the Taiwan Strait, which means that there are approximately about 60 nautical miles wide EEZ in the middle of the Taiwan Strait. But because you only choose the outer limits of the territorial sea to the mainland China to navigate, if we put all these factors together, we'll see that maybe China will have some response, and this kind of action and response have a very significant risk to cause misjudgments, confrontations, and conflicts. So I understand why the world will cares about the navigational rights here, but I think if we really want to resolve the problems, I think the most practical way maybe that China and the U.S. could sit down to have communications, talk about this, to control, and to make some declarations or joint statement. And secondly, we will consider about the disputes, about the territorial dispute and maritime dispute in the South China Sea. First of all, I'd like to say that the main dispute features in Spratly Islands are not situated in the major sea lane of the South China Sea. So the impact of the dispute is very to the freedom of navigation or to the navigation activities in the South China Sea is very limited. And secondly, we have some collisions, just as previous speakers mentioned, some collisions in the South China Sea in the hotspot, in some hotspots, especially in Spratlys. However, if we're taking these things into account, all these issues are more related to the sovereignty of the features, or can put it in a very simple way: who owns the features? First of all, is the Huangyan Scarborough Shoal, a high-tide feature in the South China Sea, and the Shenbingjiao Sabina Shoal, which is considered as high-tide feature by China in the South China Sea. And the Renaijiao, China also claims the sovereignty over that shoal. By the way,
Professor Lee, I'm sorry to cut you off, but your time has sort of run out. So if you could wrap it up, please.
Okay, I will make a conclusion in 1 minute. So if you just see the problems, I think it's not the whole story. If you think that, if you remember that the regional and the bilateral mechanisms between states in the Southeast Asia, you find that the dispute is there, but effort to de-escalate the conflict and manage those disputes are also there, and it also works. So in the conclusion, I will say that there's many fields that we should really care about. For example, the non-traditional security issues, and the global commons and the corporations here, and make the dispute and the management of the conflicts to the parties and to the ASEAN member states in China. And if the dispute between China and US on navigational issues for the two countries, and let the other corporation to involve us all to address the global commons. So I don't think that we preclude all the stakeholders outside this region, but all these parties should combine together to promote the parties, to create a good environment for those parties to resolve their problems. This all comes to the end. And if you want to get the report, you can access on this address. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lee. We'll please applause. As in previous panels, I will take questions in groups. I have 3 placards up, I believe at this point 4. Great, more, excellent. I urge you to put your placards up, or otherwise I'll be forced to ask questions. But I do want to pose, before we take our first 3, I do want to pose a question to the group, which is this: the description of this session begins with "some argue that external factors should refrain." And I want to be clear about who those some are. And I'd be interested to hear from our Southeast Asian participants as well as to whether there is concern on their part about the engagement of external actors, or whether it is in fact, as seems to be believed, primarily a Chinese phenomenon. And then second, related to that, for those that dare to take that up, what or who are external actors? I think it's easy to agree that it's the United States, but I'm wondering, and perhaps the Europeans, but is it a larger group than that? And with, as my other folks around the table contemplate that, we begin with Ms. Parker.
Thank you so much, and thank you for, again, another excellent panel. Is Professor Lee still online? I had a comment and a question.
I believe she is, yes.
Look, thank you so much, Professor. I really enjoyed your explanation. I think it's really beneficial to try and understand some of the different perspectives on this. And I look forward to reading your report. I guess my comment really goes to your report where you've explained when China has taken aggressive actions. I would say that the explanations provided by you are still not consistent with certainly my interpretation of international law. But I would also highlight that it has occurred more broadly than that. So having been on a military ship in the South China Sea, I can tell you right now I've been harassed by Chinese naval vessels outside of the context that you just provided. So I think the aggressive behaviour is more broad than that. And the second point, of course, about exclusive economic zones, we know that there is nothing in UNCLOS that prohibits military vessels from operating in exclusive economic zones. And I would just flag, as much as you highlighted US vessels operating in China's exclusive economic zone, China's consistent operations in Australia's exclusive economic zone, particularly during exercise Talisman Sabre, and an incident in 2022 where an Australian P-8 patrolling Australia's economic exclusive zone had a Chinese military-grade laser put through its cockpit. So I just wanted to highlight that I really appreciated your brief, but some of those things might help your report.
Thank you. Like I said, we'll take responses after a group of questions. I can't see, but the person who's right on the other side of the flowers. Yes, I believe so.
Thank you, Chair. Oops. I would like to address my question to Dr. Sarah Kirchberger. As you mentioned, share the issue of the increasing role of the European navies. You mentioned about several other countries would like to join the naval engagement and engaging with the dynamics in South China Sea. But if we heard the perspective of the Coast Guard leaders from Southeast Asian countries, as well as one from Japan, they perceive that CG should be utilized as a primary means in upholding or guarding the rules of law in South China Sea. With this kind of perception and environment, I would like to know how actually do you see those intended European countries will synchronize their efforts with this kind of environment, because this morning we heard the issue about jurisdiction, domestic and international law. And with this kind of intention, at the moment we have EU as part of, of the platform of ASEAN. We have a number of strategic dialogue partners. There's already EU. I noticed that UK has already proposed, gained the access. Will these European countries as well try to propose membership? And if they acquire, like, let's say, observer status, how will it contradict with the EU status as the dialogue partner of ASEAN itself?
Sorry, membership of what? I could not hear.
ASEAN dialogue partners.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there are various countries as strategic dialogue partners. Countries as well as, if I'm not mistaken, EU is considered one of the strategic dialogue partners. And with the involvement of more extra-regional countries or actors, these European countries, of course, there will be action and reactions. And Russia has become one of the dialogue partners as well. in line with China, would there be any response trigger more involvement by Russia in the region? As we have witnessed in recent years, there's an increasing large-scale joint exercises. I think those are the points that I would like to ask. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Again, one more question. Suleiman, please, if you would, first of all, it's really hard to see placards because I'm old and my eyes are bad, and the lights. So if you could just identify yourself as well, in addition to whomever you're directing a question to. Suleiman?
Thank you very much. Johannes Sulaiman from Indonesia. I have two questions actually. One is directly to Professor Kraska, James Kraska. I don't know whether you can answer it, but my question is like, what happened after the election of Donald Trump? I think that's the biggest question that many Asians are asking now. Like, how his election will, whether this time there will be like changes in U.S. foreign policy in terms of South China Sea, whether there will be like, basically more strong claim, more strong freedom of navigation act, or whether there more support for the Philippines. What do you think about it? Like, Trump seems to be like not really care about international law. So will there be any possibilities of UNCLOS getting ratified by the Republican Senate after Trump? And if not, then do you think it's a good idea or not? Just tell us, like, what do you think Trump South China Sea policy will be? I think that's everybody the biggest question, everyone. And then second, to Professor Lei, I'm kind of wondering about your data actually. When you say that Bermuda is the number 8 source of international, of the origin, I'm kind of wondering like how you get your data is. I know Bermuda is a nice place, but I'm not sure where where this Bermuda is coming from as a source for ships coming from to South China Sea. Can you elaborate on how you get the data?
Thank you. Just to be clear, I think, be careful, those are flagged ships, not necessarily Bermudian.
The flagship is on the right side.
Okay, we'll have Professor Lei answer your question. Let's take it in order of the panelists again. James, you first, please.
Thank you for the question. So I'm going to avoid sort of trying to prognosticate on kind of strategically what major issues, and just offer a few thoughts. The first is that it was the Trump administration that began the freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea. So I think that you can expect more of that. And then the second, based upon my paper and the idea of reciprocity, is that I think you can imagine that there may, I'm not sure, but that there may be a greater sense of equivalent or reciprocal transactions. And so in this sense, I think that since World War II, the United States has been very willing to kind of absorb costs for the global system, and that it's less and less inclined to do so on trade and security. And my view is that you'll see a continued acceleration to expect European states, NATO European states, to bear a greater burden to balance Russian and Iranian threats, to free up resources for the United States to be able to work with allies and partners in East Asia to counter the China threat. Thanks.
Right. Yes, the question posed to me was whether there's any sort of conflict between external nations from Europe sending warships to the South China Sea and local countries insisting that coast guards are the right instruments to deal with problems here. I think actually these are two different issue sets that we're looking at. So, of course, the regional countries, they have their own, you could say, policing to do, their own interests to defend, like combating illegal fishing and everything we heard. Of course, external actors like Europeans are not going to come to the South China Sea and do any policing here. That's not going to happen. It's not the idea. What these deployments are about is to basically demonstrate the validity of international law in terms of freedom of navigation. So what they're going to do is that they're just going to pass through and not engage in any sort of, police work. So this is, I think, two different things, and we should not conflate that. So the other thing about ASEAN dialogue becoming engaged as partners, well, all these multilateral frameworks, I am not sure how great the real world impact actually is. From what I observe is that most of the European countries ultimately tend to do their own bilateral things with individual countries. For instance, what we can do in terms of helping the local countries and their coast guards become more effective is helping them develop capabilities to do that better. Just as, for instance, the transfer of naval technologies, the ships that France, the patrol boats that France is, for instance, going to sell the Philippines, or technologies for maritime domain awareness or training. These kinds of things can be provided, but they will not be provided multilaterally necessarily, but probably in most cases bilaterally by one country to another country. And this is how I see things really having any sort of impact. This multilateral framework is, of course, important in order to gain a sense of where the region is heading, and being there as an observer is probably going to help that. But being present in the region with actual ships or with actual people that engage, with partner coast guards, partner navies, they can learn even more, I think, from actually gathering these experiences. So in conclusion, I would say these deployments from Europe, they have an external function and an internal function. The external function is plainly to contribute to freedom of navigation, to bolster this front of countries, like-minded countries that want to preserve some sort of resemblance of international order. And the other function is internal, in terms of understanding what the problem set really is about on the ground and drawing conclusions from that.
Thank you. Dr. Lei, Professor Lei, have you cared to weigh in on the question to you?
Okay. I think the first would be concerning about the 4 scenarios that China will make a response in the South China Sea, right? I think in the South China Sea, China really has the 4 scenarios to make a response, as far as I know. But if there's any scenarios that are not in the public domain, so I cannot collect that information. But from the public domain I have collected, China has those 4 will make a response in that 4 scenarios. Concerning the 2022 issue between China and Australia, I think it happens in Australia's EEZ. And as far as I'm concerned, I read the Chinese report and some reports outside China. Maybe because that the plane, I think the aircraft got too close to Chinese warship at that moment, and Chinese warships may use some laser tools to measuring the distance between the aircraft and the warship. That maybe lead to some. This is what I get from the public domain. Yeah. So I'm not the expert of the warship. I'm not expert of Navy, but I can just get some information that I could have from outside. Okay. If you considering the statistics about the
sorry, I withdraw the question. I need to read the report first. I withdraw the question. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
That's very gentlemanly of you. Thank you. Then I think that's it. Are you happy with your answer?
Professor Lee, thank you so much. And I've just pulled up your report, so I really do look forward to reading it. I just want to clarify, though, I actually am an expert in naval ships. I spent a long time on them. Naval ships don't measure distance of aircraft using lasers. That's not what happens. So if you've read that in Chinese reporting, I can clarify that that's not what occurs. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. I've got, again, a number of placards up. Greg, the man sitting next to you who's right in the lights, I can't see, please.
Sorry, my name is Hendrickson, but I'm an imposter. I was Dr. Wu before. I would like to give some additional information to Professor James Kraska on his comment on Vietnam works on the Spratlys. For your information, in addition to the airstrip, we also build other things. We also build schools, we also build pagodas, and we also build hospitals. All of those infrastructures would serve to improve the life of the fishermen, Vietnamese fishermen who go through this area. And just to share with you a good news, from a few years until now, we can already deliver babies on the Spratlys. And some of the babies are growing up. I'm sure they're going to choose to study international law, and I'm sure they're going to be your students in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for the good news for the day. Kanahara-san.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Atsuko Kanehara, past president of the Japanese Society of International Law. My comment or question could be addressed to James' explanation on reciprocity. I would like to
Can you speak a little more directly into the microphone, please?
I would like to focus upon the two issues in the South China Sea, issues of territorial sovereignty and maritime delimitation. They have, to my knowledge, two aspects. One, bilateral or reciprocal aspect, and second, erga omnes or common aspect. Let me take an example of the South China Sea arbitration. Judicial or arbitral procedures have two functions to discharge. First, to resolve the dispute. This is the bilateral or reciprocal aspect. And the second, to declare laws. This is the common aspect. So, for this common aspect, I think, going back to the title of panel 3, should the world care? Yes, it should care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray.
My question is directed to Professor Lei. My name is Ray Powell. I'm at Stanford University at Project Sea Light, and I track ships. And over the past 2 years, I have tracked on many occasions China Coast Guard and maritime militia ships intercepting Philippine Coast Guard, fisheries, and even civilian vessels well over 50 nautical miles away from any feature. So I have two questions. One, do you deny that this has happened? And two, if it has happened, what is the justification for it? Thank you.
Thank you. Admiral Chatoon. No, we need a microphone. 1 second.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. My question is also to Professor Lee Yao Lu. And my question is specific to the 4 points you said that China would react. The third point is foreign military vessels or paramilitary vessels enter 12 nautical miles within Chinese-controlled features. I'm quite curious as to how do you define what exactly is Chinese-controlled feature mean? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman behind Ray. Professor Do, thank you.
Hey, thank you. The panelists is very interesting presentation. My question goes to James. So, I mean that for a long time that some country would take, the UNCLOS or maybe the international law for double standard in the way that they claim the rights in other country maritime zones and why deny the rights of other country on that. So the principle of reciprocity is very important so that it could give proportionate treatment to each other. So I'm wondering that kind of idea is more popular in US, and also may ask other panelists that other countries may willing to take that principle. So that would give, the same treatment if the Chinese vessel passing through, or maybe do the exercise or other that in their waters. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the speakers, and then we should have time at least for one more round. I would ask if anyone has any questions for Dr. Che. I'm sure he's feeling a little neglected at this point. And secondly, I want to remind the Southeast Asians of my question about whether or not any of you might share the views of who is an external power and their rightful involvement. And I warn some folks around the table that if I don't get answers, I'm going to call on you, Daniel. So just as a heads up. Well, again, we'll start with, why don't we start actually with Professor Lee, and we'll work our way backwards to through the panel, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And first of all, I'd like to address the Chair's question a little bit first. Who is the external powers? For me, in different issues, we have different external powers. Because first of all, I think the core issue would be the territorial dispute between China and some ASEAN member states. And this is the first layer. And outside the parties directly concerned about territorial dispute, those countries are outside the dispute range. The second about the maritime dispute between China and the ASEAN member states. And also, if the interest is not involved, they may be outside this dispute. And for some navigational rights and some navigational issues, then there will be China, the coastal state, and other states. They will all be involved. And for address some global comments such as marine environment protection and some non-traditional issues, and then more actors will be involved. So I think in different layers of the dispute in the South China Sea or issues in the South China Sea, I think the outside powers is not the same. And secondly, I address to the Philippines Coast Guards and the China confrontations. I think most of the issues happens in the very adjacent waters to those disputed maritime features. And the Philippines Coastal Guards cannot be the activities cannot be considered fair, just the freedom of navigation or navigate or passage to those maritime features. They're going to intrude the adjacent waters of Scarborough Shoal. They are going to get some military supplies to the warships at the Scarborough Shoal. They will stay in the Sabina Lagoon, and those are all concerned about the sovereignty dispute between China and the Philippines. So maybe China will make the response. It's very different from the scenario that China and other states really enjoys navigational rights or really conduct passage activities in the South China Sea. So I think these are two very different issues. And secondly, about the Chinese control features, we all know that China argues or claims the sovereignty over Foshan Islands, which means the Spratleys, Parasols, Pratas, and Scarborough Shoal, as the Liu Xiaobo has mentioned. And the sovereignty is as a whole, right? Have Spratly as a whole. But China does not occupy all those maritime features. There's still many inhabited features in the South China Sea. But China exercise self-constraint just to do some response to those activities that enter into the maritime features that China occupied in the South China Sea within the 12 nautical miles. So that's my answer to the Chinese control features. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
There was no question addressed specifically to me. Let's save the time for the others.
Thanks for the question. The question is, with regard to reciprocity, I would offer a couple of thoughts. I think every observer in the room will relate to the Trump administration instituting tariffs. Those tariffs continued in very much a bipartisan manner in the Biden administration, minus the mean tweets, but the substance was the same. Indeed, they were expanded to the steel industry as well as to the semiconductor industry, and we can expect more of the same. And so there's this mentality, in my personal view, which is kind of a sense of exhaustion, $36 trillion in U.S. debt, and an unwillingness to bear sort of disproportionate costs, and insisting on sort of right-sizing the burden sharing. I think it was accelerated by COVID supply chains, and I'll give you a law of the sea example, why I think that this could gravitate toward the maritime regime. Throughout the history of negotiating the Law of the Sea Convention, the United States wanted marine scientific research to be a high seas freedom in the exclusive economic zone. The U.S. lost that debate during the negotiations for the Law of the Sea, but yet persisted for decades to not impose requirements or a consent regime on foreign scientists under Part 13 that wanted to conduct marine scientific research in the U.S. exclusive economic zone. The United States changed its view and started doing what every other country in the world does, which is require a consent regime, require extensive compliance with U.S. rules. We changed that in 2020. In other words, we gave up and we said, well, we wanted this to be a high seas freedom. Other countries didn't go along with it, so we're going to go ahead and require other countries to do what they make us do. So that's why I suggest that there could be a glimpse of this. I could be totally wrong, but I think that there's a possibility or a glimpse in the administration to come that it will be that there's a possibility of more of a reciprocal relationship in navigational regimes and law of the sea. Because so far, the United States has been very welcoming, in fact, of other countries' naval operations in both the territorial sea as well as high seas freedoms in the EEZ. But that could change. So that's just the point.
Great. I have about 7 or 8 placards up, and officially 15 minutes. I don't know if Jeff's going to give me any extra time. So I think we can get through all this and get responses. So I'm going to ask each of the people I call on, please be brief, direct your question, and we'll do the same at this end of the table, and everybody will be happy when we're done. We'll start with Greg.
Thank you, bro. Can you hear me? Good. Okay. I'm going to direct mine to Professor Cho because you told me to. What's that?
Closer to the mic.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. So for Professor Cho, South Korea has been somewhat late to the game in getting more involved in the South China Sea, just endorsed the arbitral award as part of the Camp David joint statement. So how much is this new activism, let's say, a result of the Yoon administration, and how much is it a more kind of deeply held shift in Korea's view of the South China Sea as impinging on its own national interests?
Ronnie, please.
My question to Sarah, I noticed that some of the European countries that you mentioned have or will send their warship to South China Sea are also the ones who want to sell their equipment. So my question is, how can you communicate it to the coastal states that the intention behind that is actually pure, not just for the sake of money? Thank you.
Thank you. Alessio.
Can you repeat the last part? I did not catch it. I'm sorry. The last part.
Yeah, how to communicate it to the coastal states that the European intention for the FONOPS is really about, freedom of navigation, not just, commercial purposes. Thank you.
Alessio?
A very brief observation about external actors and the question, if I may. unless we're talking about Mars, aliens coming from Mars on the planet, when we're talking about rules of law in the applicable on the ocean, it makes no sense the definition of external actors. There is no external actor to the use of the ocean within the context of the rule of law. None whatsoever. Unless it's aliens coming from Mars. You know, if that's what we're talking about, fine. Otherwise, I would suggest that when we talk about rule of law, we drop the idea of external actors because everybody is within the law when they sail at sea. And the ocean is one, and rules are applicable globally. This leads me to the question that I have for Sarah. You mentioned in your presentation that this year there was very little coordination across the various deployments. Do you think it's desirable to have greater coordination? And to what extent you see this happening, starting with CSG 25 next year? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Chan?
Yes, I would like to have a comment on the question of who are external powers. So if we talk about South Asia as a region, then both China and the US are external powers. But then if we talk about the Indo-Pacific as a region, then both of them include in the region. So if we want to talk about the South China Sea disputes, I think the better word would be the United States is a non-claimant, but is a stakeholder. So, Antia, thanks.
Thank you for answering my question. Mr. Lee.
I'm Peter Lee from the Arson Institute. My question is to Professor Chair and Professor Kirchberger. So we kept talking about reciprocity, so I was struck by the idea of reciprocal access agreements. So these have been signed by Australia, Japan, the UK, and with the Philippines most recently. So do you see any way that that can have a dual-use purpose in terms of complicating Chinese thinking on the South China Sea? Thank you.
Ms. Yi.
Thank you. I just want to add on the water cannon use. China has only used the water cannon towards Philippines. And that, is it an isolated incident, or is it an isolated case that China has not used the water cannon on other countries? And secondly, just to build up, I did think the US had a consistent South China Sea strategy. It has shifted its strategy based on the structural factor of the international order from the Cold War era to the post-Cold War era, the unipolar moment, and now the multipolar moment. So in 1996, the Nye Initiative, or the Nye report, initiated by Joseph Nye, argued that the US military presence in the region, especially the East Asia region, had important consequences for the stability of the region and for the success of American politics, economic and security goals. This is aligned with Americans' national interest to maintain the security alliance in the region. And especially, I want to note the 2020 Trilateral Maritime Strategy established by the Trilateral Service of the US. The report's name is Advantage at Sea, and more specifically, it labeled China as a comprehensive threat to US maintenance of its advantage at sea. So to answer the question of who is the external actor in the East Asia, I think the US is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have, I believe, a young leader with his placard up. So identify yourself and don't embarrass your program.
Thank you so much. I am Atwat from Young Leaders Pacific Forums. So the thematic question for this panel is that should the world care? But as of now, the world means only government. I want to know more about public opinion in each country. What is the overall public opinion and how consequential is public opinion upon government policy option? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I had, Suleiman, if you can be brief, because you've spoken once.
Yeah, sorry, this is just an observation. I already read, the nice report that you told us, read, and it is basically, I find this interesting. I quote directly here. In responding to such provocations, the road controls and other measures taken by China Coast Guard vessels do not fall into the realm of irregular navigation activities and therefore do not apply to collision avoidance rules. Basically, are you saying that China is allowed to break international law as long as they think the territory belongs to them? Thank you. Because it is said here in page 35 in your report, stating that it is fine not to apply to collision avoidance rule because the Philippines keep provoking China. So in responding to such provocations, China's Coast Guard vessels do not fall to realm of regular navigation activities and therefore do not apply to collision avoidance rules. Basically, it is fine to ram other countries' vessels. I mean, this is based on your own report. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel, I warned you, and I haven't heard an answer to my question yet. Ms. Tran redefined actor as stakeholder. But my question really is, are there other states that object to the inclusion of foreign actors in South China Sea questions? And I'm putting you on the spot because I'm the moderator and I can. So if you would briefly, I mean, are there other states in the region that share this view?
Oh, I'm quite sure they are. My Prime Minister just blamed Western capitalists for exacerbating tensions in the South China Sea yesterday. So there is that point of view, but it is very much contested back home as well. I would strongly agree with Vic. I think stakeholders is a much more inclusive and a much more acceptable term. I think anyone from Norway to the United States has as much stake in what happens in the South China Sea as do the littoral claimant states.
All right, and I want to thank everybody for being succinct. And now I'm going to go back to the panel in order this time. And everybody gets to say something. And you've got basically about 2 minutes to wrap up your remarks. James, you know? Okay.
Yeah, I think I got a question from Greg. So the South Korean activism about the regional security issues like South China Sea. Well, I think Korea used to be, in the past, used to be very shy. I mean, as long as the peace and stability in South China Sea is maintained, I don't think we have to talk about it. I don't think we have to do something about it. But I mean, I think that it seems to me that South Korean perception is that the kind of crisis in the South China Sea reached to the point that we cannot anymore just stay away and just looking at the situation just like third-party bystander. We do have a critical stake, and in terms of the our kind of the principle on the rule of law and respect for international law, I mean, it's not really enough for us to stay away from the situation. And also, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think our sentiment is that we have a greater sense of crisis about the situation, and also we have a heightened sense, a sense of heightened national confidence recently acquired about our capability, which allow us to do positive things with regard to the issue. And also we have a higher sense of responsibility. I think all of these kind of changing perceptions led us to a little bit of stronger activism. Of course, we do have domestic polarization, very much divided partisan differences, but this is related to our national interest and related to the principle of respecting for international law. So I would expect that, of course, you have some fluctuations down the road, but I would say that South Korea is going for this direction down the road. Thank you.
There were a couple of questions for me. First, the one, I think from Indonesia, about the commercial aspects of these Indo-Pacific deployments of European nations. Yeah, you're lucky. I have worked actually in the naval shipbuilding industry, so I know a thing or two about how hard it is to convince governments to give, time of a precious naval vessel to further industry expert interests. It is not exactly easy, and you have to also look at whether the industry in question is state-owned or not. For instance, the Dutch and the German naval shipbuilders are not state-owned. They're private enterprises, and the government actually couldn't. Of course, they try to be somewhat helpful, but you know, the industry can't order the Navy around and say, like, do this port visit or that. It's not like that. Of course, they will aim to sort of profit from the transit if that is possible, but it's only possible if there is a sales opportunity in one of these countries, if there's actually an open, you know, opportunity, a project, or if there's a pre-existing customer relationship. Otherwise, that's not really. And you can also tell something of the intention if you look at the nature of the vessels. For instance, the Italians, this is an industry that is partially state-owned, and they often try to use the opportunity to go to an arms fair, for instance. They've done that previously in Malaysia, for instance. However, this time they sent an aircraft carrier, and this is not an export product. You don't export aircraft carriers as a rule, typically not. So this case of a transit was probably not, you know, the prime motivation. The Turks, however, have made it explicit that they send this particular warship to showcase the indigenous industry's capacity, because it's the first corvette, the first warship that Turkey has indigenously developed, designed, and constructed. And they have already exported it to Pakistan and Malaysia. So that was a great opportunity for them to showcase like the prowess of their industry. So as you can see, again, very different motivations and very different basic situations. But as a rule, I think the order of priority is the political is the main priority, the political aim of the transit, because it's super costly and difficult to organize. And then other opportunities in the national interest will be sort of weaved into it, but not the other way around. And the other question from Alessio Patalano about coordination between the European countries, whether there is going to be more coordination in the future and whether that is even desirable. In principle, I do think it would be, of course, somewhat desirable, in particular regarding the timing, because it would be ideal if these deployments would not all happen simultaneously, but rather like spread out over time, so that it's a continuous thing rather than a surge and then nothing. However, in practice, I think it can be exceedingly difficult to accomplish that, because all of these deployments, the South China Sea transit is just a portion of the whole thing. The Dutch and the Germans conducted a circumnavigation of the globe, by the way. So that was just one part, was just transiting the Indo-Pacific. The other two countries, the Turks and the Italians, they went like back and forth. But the Turks, they went to Japan, and then the Italians went to Australia, all the way to Australia and back. So this is, again, the problem. If you have such different aims, how to coordinate that. And then, of course, you need the cooperation of all the individual countries that you want to visit. If you want to do a port visit, you can't just say, I'm coming, make room for me. The hosting country will need to have capacity to receive you, and the port needs to be available for that. And these negotiations can take a while. Also, you will want to exercise along the way. You will want to find a lot of different opportunities to conduct joint exercises with other powers, and that needs to, again, to be coordinated. So I personally am a little bit skeptical how realistic it is to expect European nations with all these different priorities and interests in mind to really achieve this level of coordination. I would expect the coordination to be more of a macro type, like let's do something every 2 years or something along those lines.
Thank you very much. Professor Lai.
Okay, I will address the questions on the ground or just closing all the...
Both within about 3 minutes.
Okay, okay. I personally, I don't think the collision or the ram is intentionally conducted by the Chinese Coast Guards. But it really happens during that time. I personally, from my personal perspective, because I'm an international lawyer, think the human being's life is more important than anything else. This is my very personal opinion, very personal. So I'm not going to justify anything, but I'd like to say that if this I really consider that how these things could be avoided at sea. Because we know that China and the Philippines has some bilateral arrangements in the Scarborough Shoal, in the Second Normal Shore. Why this kind of special arrangement are not be respected and implemented at sea? So I think that's the meaning to avoid this tragedy to happen. I think this is the meaning of the mechanisms for prevent conflict to manage the dispute. But at last, I think the bilateral mechanism has its own effect to control the situations, de-escalate the dispute or the conflict in the end. So I still hope that we know that international law is not only the UNCLOS, but also the regional arrangement and the bilateral arrangement. There are some multi-layers of the rules and arrangements for the combined together to constitute the international law. So make a conclusion, if all the international laws are obeyed, I think the South China Sea will go to a bright future. That's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for excellent questions. Thank you. Join me in thanking the panelists for contributions. You're all here. It's been a very long day. I would just add one thought, which is that it's interesting we've sort of framed this discussion rather narrowly, and I think it's understandable. But, you know, the topic is actually about becoming involved in the South China Sea issue. And it strikes me that most of the people around this table would argue that external involvement in the region is a very good thing in general, particularly when we talk about economic engagement or other forms of involvement. And if one is going to be involved, or if a nation is going to be involved on that particular dimension, then obviously questions about the role or rule of law and other subsidiary and associated questions would naturally have a stake in that as well. And I just want to sort of caution us all about thinking, even though we are here courtesy of the Philippine Coast Guard, thinking a little too narrowly about the terms that we're using and how to think perhaps more expansively and to the degree to which that gives us purchase on perhaps other avenues to assess the problems and maybe work at some of their resolution. But I'll leave you that for the afternoon. Again, thank you all very much. Thank the panelists, and I believe we're done for the day.
Thank you very much, ma'ams and sirs. Before we conclude the day, sir, we'd like to request our panel, together with our panel chair, to please rise for a quick photo opportunity before we call it a day. Yeah, maybe we request the Zoom to be opened as well so that we can include all of our panelists for this photo opportunity, please. Thank you. There we go. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us for this afternoon and this whole day as well. Just a quick reminder that tomorrow our program for the next panel, for the panel 4, will start at exactly 9:15 a.m. And just a quick announcement to our friends from the media to please avoid doing interviews while the session is ongoing. Thank you very much. And to everyone, have a wonderful day.